This is the rent board. This, in fact, is the rent board. All right, everybody ready to go? City TV ready to go? All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Thursday, August 10th meeting of the Santa Monica Rent Control Board. What am I? I think it's a misprint on my typed agenda. Oh, the minutes. Yep. Yep. I was looking at the minutes. Forgive me. Got my stuff out of order here. But anyhow, let's start that again. Good evening and welcome to the Thursday, September 14th meeting of the Santa Monica Rent Control Board. May we call the roll?
Yes, Commissioner Ivanov.
Here.
Bronska.
Here.
Commissioner Gwynn.
Here.
Vice Chair Leslie.
Here.
Chair Foster.
Here. All right, please join me for the pledge to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, if the board members will take a look at the minutes of our August 10th meeting, and when you are satisfied that they are accurate, to the best of your knowledge, I will entertain a motion to accept them. Your mic is not on.
I move that we approve the minutes of the August 10th meeting. Second.
All right, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All right, the minutes are approved. Special agenda items. Executive Director Condon, do you have announcements tonight?
Yes, I do. I have a couple, and then Mr. Costello is going to provide some information about our public contacts over the...
Right before you do that, I want to make the public aware, in case anyone's here to speak on this item, because it's important to do it at the beginning of the agenda. As soon as we know information, we should convey it to the public. We, through no fault of our own, have had to remove the public hearing item from tonight's agenda. That is item 11A. Consideration of proposed amendments to Chapter 16 regulations regarding withdrawal of accommodations. Our legal staff is completely out sick, and we do not feel it's proper to hold a public hearing on an item without our legal staff present. So do we need to vote on removing it? We're continuing it till next month, but we wanted to make sure that people watching and people in attendance had an opportunity to understand our agenda management. All right. Executive Director Condon, back to you, and item 6, special agenda items.
Okay, I have a couple of announcements. The Ethiopian community in Santa Monica is hosting an Ethiopian Cultural Festival this Sunday, September 17th from 2 to 7 p.m. at Virginia Avenue Park. All are invited to join the Ethiopian community in celebrating Ethiopian culture and their new year with traditional music and a fashion show, authentic Ethiopian food, and traditional coffee ceremony, as well as fun activities for children. Mr. Costello and Ms. Platas will be staffing a table at the event to provide information and answer questions about rent control. I also wanted to mention that, as I have been for the past couple of meetings, I've been updating you on the payment of the annual registration fees. We are now up to just over 90% of the fees have been paid. We just sent out the rebill. Every month that the fees remain unpaid, the owners are assessed a 4% penalty. At the end of October, after that rebill occurs, any unpaid properties fees will be referred to the legal department for collection. Owners may not increase rents until all fees are paid in full. And any owners who have questions about their fees may contact us in the office at 310-458-8751 or by email at rentcontrol@santamonica.gov. As I mentioned at the beginning, Mr. Costello is going to give us some information this evening on our public contacts. The summer is traditionally the busiest time of the year for us, and especially for our public information staff when we're communicating with both tenants and owners about the general adjustment and the registration fees. And now that we've completed that busy time of June, July, and August, I've asked Mr. Costello to share an overview with you of our public contacts and trends this year.
Good evening, Commissioners. This is a great opportunity to highlight the work of my team, the Public Information Team, because as Ms. Condon said, it is the busiest time of the year, and they do handle quite a bit of work, as you will soon see. So if we can go to the first slide. I just want to go over, we're going to kind of go back for a whole year since last year's GA and what's happened since then, because it kind of sets the context for all the public contact that we've had. So of course, in June of last year, the board announced the GA of 6% with $140 maximum. We then sent out a mailing to all owners and tenants, including MAR report of the registered tenancies, the registration fee bill, and then in July, owners needed to begin noticing the tenants of that increase. They had to get those notices to the tenants by August 1st in order to qualify for the increase on that date. August 1st, the fees are due, and in August, tenants start to get all of those notices. They look at the increase that they're going to have to pay in September when the GA becomes effective. And then, as you all know, in November of last year, Measure RC passed in the election, and that changed the GA for the year. And so in December, we sent out another mailing to all the tenants and landlords with another MAR report and a notice form. And then in February, in December, owners also had to give notice to the tenants to have the reduction effective in February. Then again, this year, we sent those same mailings in June. Owners went noticed the tenants by August 1st and pay their fees, and then the GA this year became effective on September 1st. So if we go to the next one. So this slide represents the public contacts that we've had in this last year. So from June of 21 through the end of August. And as you can see, there are some obvious peaks there in August of last year, right after the notices went out. Again in January for the AGA, and then a lot of contacts these last 2 months in July and August, peaking at over 1,800 calls, emails, and walk-ins per month. So very high volume of work. And I would say one thing, we do ask that we can have as-needed help in the summer, and I think you can see why we need that help. So we're very thankful for our as-needed staff who come in as well. So to put that in this year's, this last 12-month or 14-month period in context, if we go to the next slide, I'll show you the difference from, we looked at June 2021 through now. And you see on the left-hand side, there's, that's much less contact than we had in this last year, thanks to the very high GA and the AGA. So it's really two kind of GA cycles shown here. You'll notice that, and some of these, where we have the peaks, so the blue is tenants, and the orange are contacts from landlords. And it's really the landlords who are contacting us a lot around the time of the general adjustment. And that's because they want to make sure that they registered their tenancies. They didn't understand, what the amounts, that were allowed were. Still a lot of confusion over the 3% base for this year. And so hopefully everybody now knows what it's all about, and we will start to see this trend tailor off. But it's been very, very busy. Just looking at June, July, and August of 2021, we had about 3,000 contacts. in 2022, for that same period, we had about 30% more with that 6% GA to 3,900 contacts. And then the last 3 months of this year, we're up to 4,700 contacts, so about 57% higher than the baseline in 2021. So, been very, very busy. The next one. So what are they calling us about? The number one thing that people call us about is the rent. What's shown here is based on a keyword search from the log that the information coordinators keep. So they keep a brief note about what the call was about, and it's really for internal purposes to make sure we know if we've answered somebody, if we need to get back to somebody about something, or direct the call to a certain person. So it's not an exact science. It's just kind of based on the words that they use. There's, some inconsistencies in terminology and things like that. But what I looked at here were uses of the word rent. At the bottom, you can see there, or MAR, the maximum allowable rent, GA, the AGA. NOC is short for notice of change in terms of tenancy, and notice as its own word. So putting those things together, kind of looking at these together, you can kind of see the peaks. And again, the peaks are around when the GAs happen. That's when we get the most amount of calls regarding the GA. The scale is a little different. If you look on the left side, rather than the 1,800 that we were up to in total calls, this is showing a little over 700 for GA-related things. But it is close to, I wanted to note that we actually received more calls regarding the GA last year when it was the 6%. And that was close to about 50% of the calls that we were getting in those months. And then in the last few months, it's been about a third of the calls. So, there's a lot of confusion still, but this also shows that people are calling us about a lot of other things too. So there's a lot of topics that the information coordinators handle. And I can go on to the next one. The next most common thing at this time is really related to the fees. So we get a lot of calls from owners. And this one's looking at keywords of pay or fees or bill. And pretty obviously, those are around the time that the bills go out and when they are due. The next highest group are petition related, which is another big part of the agency's activities. And these keywords are decrease, excess, construction. So the three different types of major petitions that we handle, and just the word petition itself. So most of the calls are regarding decrease petitions, which you see in blue at the bottom. And again, we have these peaks in August and February and August again. So one other thing I noticed is that the excess rent, calls about excess rent, were a little higher around the GA last year, the February GA, and now here in August. So looking at that. And when you're ready, we can go to the next one. Okay. And then this slide is about eviction related topics. So we looked at words like evict or non-payment or quit, like pay or quit. Questions about the moratorium, and harassment as well. And again, the scale is important. On the left, you see that we're up to just 70. So these are relatively small percentage of the calls that we get, and yet they're of course very important. I know that generally, there's no dramatic peak here. It's pretty consistent. It has been pretty consistent over the year. It's increased a little bit, I think. In August, you see more orange there for non-payment. The city's protections allowed repayment through September 1st. And so we'll see what happens after this, but eviction notices, not all eviction notices are recorded with us. So all eviction notices, except for non-payment, do have to be filed with the Rent Control Board. So we unfortunately don't have the information about the notices for non-payment.
Dan, I'm just going to interrupt you just
Yeah.
for a brief moment. We're scuffling around because we know that City TV is having a problem with its presentation of public meetings right now. But like I watched the council meeting on YouTube, but we have several callers and texters telling us that there is no audio tonight on YouTube so far of the entire meeting. So just letting City TV and others know that even though the mics are on, it's not. That's what the interruption was, and I don't want to distract from your report. So
That's all right.
go right ahead.
That's right. Thank you. So I did look at the number of eviction notices that have been filed with us. There have only been 53 so far this year. In August, we did have 11, so that was the highest month that we've gotten them. But as I said, it's difficult to know if tenants are having trouble with paying rent because those notices aren't filed with us. And then last, I will show you the tenancy registration forms that have been filed. And again, you'll see some peaks, like in August 2022, owners filed a lot of tenancy registration forms, and that is possibly because to qualify for the September increase of 6%, they had to register all of those tenancies. Maybe not all of those units qualified for that increase that year, but it is interesting that we got a large influx of registration forms right before that very large general adjustment. In the last 3 months, we've also gotten a lot, about 500 per month, which is a lot to review and process. But one of the advantages that you can see in the difference between the ones in blue and in orange, since we introduced the online civics portal for filing registration forms, we're getting many more forms now being filed electronically than we are on paper. And although August shows a little bit more paper, that is probably because we entered those paper forms that we received in July in August. So I don't think that the trend is reversing or anything. We're getting more and more forms filed online, which is great for us because we don't have to do the data entry, and there's some more data integrity that's being filed by the owners themselves. We're continuing to enhance the system to make it even better for the users. And then I guess that's it for the tenancy registrations. It's a big part of the work because there's a lot of people involved in processing those. So with all that, I would just have to say that I want to thank my staff who worked so hard this summer, this whole last year. It's been sort of an endless summer since last year. And I think everybody's looking forward to kind of getting back to, business as usual.
Thank you, Mr. Costello, so much. I wish I'd known this report I wish it had been more like of an agenda item we could have had the slides, and I, for one, would like access to the data that you've compiled. And we know that the measure that this body sent to the city council to place on the ballot last year, we know it was a big lift and became an even bigger lift than we anticipated. And we do appreciate very much everything that your department did and the whole agency. Thank you all.
And we can ask Mr. Costello to do this type of update maybe a year from now or 6 months, and then we can put it on as a specific administrative item.
Great. All right. Wonderful. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Costello? I don't think so. Okay. Thank you. We'll move on. We'll move on quickly. Now, is Haka on the line? Or, okay, great, because, wonderful. So we're moving on to number 7, public comment. This is the time in the agenda and the meeting when we hear from the public on matters that are within our purview and jurisdiction, but that are not on tonight's agenda. And to that end, I have one request for public comment. That is Karamu. That's you. Mr. Karamu, please step up. Did you want to make a comment tonight? Oh, yes, it's number 7 in the agenda, and that's the item we're at tonight. The clerk will turn on your mic. There you go. Once you begin, you will have up to 3 minutes to address the board.
Good evening, everybody. And thank you for putting the work. It's my first time doing this. And I'm curious about one thing to start with. I do understand that there's some people online following this.
Mm-hmm.
How many people are online right now?
City TV is having problems with its broadcast, and so YouTube is the only audience, and it's not possible for us to know up here on the dais how many
So we
people
don't
are
have any
watching.
statistics from that, who is connected, who is not connected, so we don't know.
Correct.
All right. Another thing I heard from Mr. Costello earlier is they have some difficulties knowing exactly how many evictions were filed because they're not coming all to your agency. I'm a tenant, so I'm saying if this board is to help tenant, I hope I'm right. That's what it is, right? So if they don't know how many people or how many they have filed from their board, where else they could file those evictions?
Can you please repeat your statement,
Okay.
either more into the microphone or in another way?
I'm trying to understand, like I said, it's first time, so
You're
they're having
fine.
hard time having the effective number of eviction file because not all of them are filed through the agency. So if they don't have the whole list, where else the owner will file those evictions?
Public comment is for unidirectional, one-directional comment coming to us. We are not allowed by the rules to converse during the meeting and during public comment.
Oh, just
With the
saying
speaker?
things and then,
Correct. And if you have thoughts on processes or things that should be something, you may state that at this time,
no
certainly.
problem. Like
But
I
you're
said,
also
first
welcome to
time, I
visit.
don't know how
You're
it
welcome
works.
to visit with staff
So-
tonight, if you wish, to answer your questions.
Yeah, it does. Like I said, I'm not sure how it works. So
Sure.
my statement then will be maybe I will assume to the court, maybe they can reach out to the court and I don't know if it's doable and try to have those lists handy and, have a more effective list when they address us so we understand where the problem lies really.
Okay, yeah, I definitely hope that you will avail yourself of speaking to staff tonight. As a matter of fact, I bet you Mr. Costello will be willing to step outside in the hallway with you right now to address your concerns.
Okay, no problem.
Is there anything else?
Well,
Let's let him finish his thought to the clerk. Thank you. Go ahead.
In the more general question is rent controls are not really applicable to single family houses?
The law changed in 1995, but again, staff can talk to you more thoroughly about that. Thank you for coming. We appreciate it. All right. Seeing no other speakers on item 7, that will close public comment. Moving on to item 10A, jurisdictional items, we have an exemption at 2015 Oak Street, Unit 2017. May we have a staff report, please?
Good evening, Commissioners. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you very much. So this is an exemption that's filed by 1970.3 LLC by Ms. Gina Brown, who's a trustee of the managing member of that LLC. This property consisted of a single-family dwelling but they have now constructed a second detached unit with a garage in the rear of the property. And they have applied to exempt that newly constructed unit from the rent control law. Now, the rent control law does provide an exemption for units that are built after its adoption in April 10th of 1979. Units that are newly constructed, but which are really just a conversion of an existing structure, are not eligible for this exemption. But if the newly constructed unit is essentially constructed from the ground up, then it is eligible for this exemption, unless it's otherwise subject to the rent control law because of the processes of the Ellis Act or a removal permit that's issued by the board. Neither of those situations apply to this case, and this unit was built from the ground up, so it is eligible for that exemption. That's why staff recommends the board approve the application and adopt the proposed findings of fact and conclusions of law.
Thank you for that report. Before we continue, Haka, please try to keep your voice very, very consistently close to your microphone, if it's a phone or otherwise. You were kind of going in and out there, but we did hear and understand. All right.
I do my best.
We do not have any public comment on this item. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, I will just simply say that this is a pretty straightforward case. We do exempt single-family homes from rent control as a result of the Costa-Hawkins law passed in 1995, enacted in 1999. And fun fact that I learned this week was that every single-family home in Santa Monica is technically sort of rent controlled until it gets exempted proactively. However, it's not active in our system unless it's been a rental property. So it's very interesting. But do we have a motion on this item?
I'll move that we accept the exemption and approve the findings of fact and conclusions of law.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, may we call the roll, please?
Yes, Commissioner Gwynn,
Yes.
Commissioner Ivanov,
Yes.
Commissioner Gronska,
Yes.
Vice Chair Leslie,
Yes.
and Chair Foster.
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right, moving on to item 10A2, no, 10AB, no, 10A2. I was right the first time. 363 21st Place, applicant J and S Edelman. May we have a staff report, please?
Commissioners, I will also try to speak louder to hopefully avoid the reception issues from the last one. Please let me know if there's any issues.
Sounds great.
Great. So this is the property here is owned by Jeremy and Samantha Adelman. And this property was and remains a single-family home. And it was a single-family home back when the rent control law was adopted. And the Adelmans bought this property back in 2012, and they have applied to exempt it as a single-family home. Now, not every single-family home is exempt from the rent control law, but the rent control law does exempt a single-family home if an owner can prove that he or she continuously occupied that home for 2 years as his or her place of residence. And in this case, because the Adelmans are their property's owners and the property is a single-family home, what they had to show to the board is that they have actually occupied the property as their principal residence for the last 2 years. They don't own any other residential property in Los Angeles County. They do own a condo in New York, but they don't spend any time there at that address, and they own it as an investment. The Adelmans also supplied utility, financial, and government records to show that they have lived on the property for at least 2 consecutive years. The DMV voter registrar and Santa Monica water records also show the property as Mr. Adelman's mailing address. And for all those reasons, staff recommends that the board permanently exempt this property from the rent control law as a single-family home that has been occupied by its owners for 2 consecutive years and adopt the proposed findings of fact and conclusions of law.
All right, does anyone have any questions for staff? Or any discussion? All right, seeing none, I move that we affirm the findings of fact and conclusions of law and grant this exemption. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
We call the roll, please.
Yes, Commissioner Ivanov,
Yes.
Commissioner Gonska,
Yes.
Commissioner Gwynn,
Yes.
Vice Chair Leslie,
Yes.
Chair Foster.
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right. Moving on to our last item of the night, second to last item of the night. We have item 10B1. It's an appeal, 1738 9th Street, Unit B. The appellant is Kay Pasker, tenant. May we have a staff report, please?
Commissioners, Ms. Kendra Pasker, who is the tenant of Unit B, filed a rent decrease petition alleging various maintenance conditions and reductions of housing services. The hearing officer granted a decrease of $185. She has appealed that decision. The appeal, however, is untimely. It was filed 3 days after the 10-day appeal deadline. Now, the board can hear a late appeal if it finds that the appellant has provided good cause. Here, Ms. Pasker stated that she filed the appeal late because she was ill, out of the country, and also coordinating care for her mother, who had had a mini stroke. And in dealing with all that, she mistakenly thought the 10-day deadline meant 10 business days, not calendar days. Given the fact that the 3-day delay didn't prejudice either party, and given the reasons provided for the delay, staff recommends that the board find good cause for considering the appeal. I would first ask that the board consider that issue.
So you should vote first on whether to accept.
Oh. All right, is there any discussion of accepting it? I would move that we accept.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, is it a voice vote sufficient?
Yes.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, we are in favor of hearing the appeal.
Thank you, Commissioners. Ms. Pasker appeals the decision because she thinks the hearing officer should have granted her higher decreases. Board reviews this matter as an appellate body. So we affirm the decision if it is supported by substantial evidence in the record, even if the board would have decided the matter differently had it been the finder of fact. In granting decreases for reductions of housing services, the amount of the decrease must be in accordance with the ranges that are set forth in the board's regulation and reflect the extent to which the reduced housing service is in proportion to the totality of the housing services paid for by the rent. The record shows that the landlord in this case has reduced Ms. Paskin's backyard to a third of its original size. The regulations provide for a decrease of $15 to $175 for reduced yard and patios. The hearing officer here granted a decrease of $125 because Ms. Paskin's backyard was significantly reduced but not eliminated. The record also shows that Ms. Pasker's fence is not broken, but it is wobbly with some exposed nails protruding. The regulation provides for a decrease of $30 to $260 for security gates and fencing. Here the fence wasn't removed, it is intact, and it's not broken, but it is wobbly. For those reasons, the hearing officer granted a decrease of $30. The record further shows that Ms. Pasker's backyard, which mainly consists of artificial grass, is landscaped on the perimeter with succulents and decorative rocks. Previously, the landlord's gardener would tend to both common areas as well as tenants' individual yards. The gardener no longer tends to tenants' own backyards, and as a result, some of the plants have died in Ms. Pasker's backyard and were removed but not replaced. The board's regulation provides for a decrease of $5 to $90 for reduced landscaping. The hearing officer granted a decrease of $15 here because much of the landscaping remains intact. The regulation for reduced yard care services provides for the same range of $5 to $90, and the hearing officer granted $15 for this service as well because Ms. Paskin's yards requires little maintenance. All of these decreases are within the ranges set forth in the board's regulations, and are supported by substantial evidence in the record, staff therefore recommends that the board affirm the decision and its findings of fact and conclusions of law.
Thank you for that report. Does anyone have questions for staff before we move on to hear from the parties? Okay, seeing none, we will take the comments, public comments on this item. The first is the appellant, Ms. Pasker. You may approach the mic. And as the appellant in this matter, you will have up to 5 minutes, although you do not need to use all 5 unless you need it.
Hi,
Hello.
first time caller, long time fan. Hope I never hear ever again. So the reason that I appealed is because, well, one, my backyard was unusable for the 9 months that it took them to decide to fix what they broke. They came into my backyard, they ripped it up, and then they just left it there for close to a year, almost kind of like, what are you gonna do about it? And then they fixed it 3 days before my hearing. So they could have done it. They just decided not to, which meant that I couldn't use it. It was covered in, you know, as the report said, rebar and nails and AstroTurf and construction materials that they dumped not only in the backyard, but on my actual items, which are now have to be replaced. On top of that, there actually was, you know, plants and things like that around, and when you don't weed, regardless of, you know, whether or not there are rose bushes or something like that, weeds do come through, and now they're overgrown. I mean, I brought evidence, but then I realized I was supposed to put that in beforehand. So, and then they also didn't just do that, but they blow the dirt, they take away the leaves, they do all of these things. And what's happening now is that my neighbors are getting this. Bizarrely, this is not in their lease. It's only in my lease because I have a separate lease from them, but I am not. So I'm just watching my neighbors getting the landscaping and gardening that I was supposed to be getting, and they're refusing to do it. You know, what I really want is for them to just do it. But if the only way to penalize them is monetarily, I guess I don't have a choice, because they're not going to do it because I can't make them. And when I did some preliminary looks myself for how much it would cost. So the gardeners and landscapers come once a week. And when I did some of my own research, I got estimates of anywhere from $250 a month, which is ridiculous for my tiny square of space, to, let me see, I have $150 for every
Excuse
week.
me. Excuse me. Ms. Pasker, is this information part of the record that was developed at the hearing? Because as an appeal, the
Oh.
board can only consider what's in the record.
Oh, no,
So
sorry.
at this time,
And
you
as soon as she got to a dollar amount, I was going to comment because there was $1 amount listed here. I just wasn't sure which one, if she was going to reference the same one, but Ms. Condon's correct. We
Okay.
can't hear new evidence.
Oh, okay. all
But
right.
continue.
I guess my point is that it would be very difficult to get a gardener to come and do what needs to be done for $15. And so I'm not getting the service that I should be getting, and my neighbors who are right, like, it's a 3-unit space, like it's not a giant space, are getting, you know, the landscaping and gardening that I should also be getting. And in lieu of that, I should, if I have to pay for it myself, then the adjustment needs to match that. I think that's about it. Oh, the fence. I'm not sure why people don't understand the state of the fence. I realize that it's difficult to capture it on film. It looks a lot worse in person because it is falling over. It's not a little broken, it's falling over. Since luckily the construction people have stopped jumping over my fence, if they had continued to do that, the next time they went over the fence, they would have gone down with it. It needs to be replaced, and it's the only barrier, not only between my space and the construction yard, but it's also the only barrier between my space and the dump area behind the construction yard, where there's a lot of unhoused people, and I've seen them climbing over into the construction area. I don't know, maybe to scavenge. I'm not quite sure why they're doing that. There's also a porta potty there. So So the fact that this fence is falling down is even more dire for me. I guess that's all I can have to say. And I made it under the limit, so.
If you've concluded your comments, so we are allowed to ask you clarifying questions.
Okay.
We're not engaging in discussion, but they're, if anyone has clarifying questions. And does anyone have any questions for the appellant? Yes, Vice Chair Leslie.
So you said the gate, like people were jumping over it. Is that how the gate started to deteriorate?
So they took it apart when they did all of this construction and moved it. The yard was originally about 30 to 33 feet long, and they moved up the fence and everything that was attached to it, the artificial grass, and they ripped up all the lighting and everything, and they moved it up 20 some odd feet. And then they put the fence together, but they kind of just slapped it together, which is why there's nails about this big sticking out of the fence. Again, they could have done it properly with the right size nails, but they don't care. So they're just sticking out and rusted, and you know, it's falling apart. You could like see on the sides, there's like long nails, and it's very separated. You know, like the nails are barely holding on, you know, holding things together, basically.
So, so did you submit that into evidence?
I haven't submitted the newest pictures into evidence, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm just saying at all, period.
Yes.
And number two, you did.
Oh, it's multiple pictures.
Okay, so, and number two, do you have any young children?
No, I just have a pet.
Okay. That's all I wanted to ask you for right now. Thank you.
So I'm a little confused by a couple things I read in the staff report
Okay.
and in the hearing findings. Is it your understanding that they intend to restore the yard at some point?
So they did originally tell us when this happened that they were going to restore the yard, but then I started to notice that they were building a foundation in the space that they said they were going to give back to us. And now there's a structure there, so I don't think we're getting it.
My other question is, your move-in date was a month before construction started?
No, my move-in date was February 21st, and then 2 weeks after that, I discovered that the property had been sold, and I was presented with a new lease. And at the same time that happened is when the means and methods went into play and was submitted. So basically, I didn't realize that I was moving into this situation, and I found out 2 weeks after I got there, and I was just stuck. I mean.
So did our staff advise you of another process we have that's called a construction-related decrease petition process?
Yes, and that is what I will be putting in next, yeah.
Okay, all right, I just wanted to understand what you've been told.
Yes.
All right, thank you so much. We have one more, Commissioner Commissioner Gonska first has a question for you.
Actually, it was the same question that you had. I was trying to understand. I believe that it's correct that you, during a portion of, I think you mentioned 9 months, that you had no access to use the yard.
Right.
So you lost 100% of the yard. Now I think you have
I've got a third of it, yes.
third. And the structure that they put in that's the permanent structure, that's garages that were replaced?
Right, so there was a garage in the back. There was a 2-car garage. We each had our own garages. They ripped down the garage. They originally told us that they are going to build units over the garage, but instead they built the units where our old backyards were. And they didn't tell us, they told us that we were going to be getting it back, and then obviously I have eyes. Like I could see that that's not going to happen. But I guess they needed somebody there to pay the rent while they did this, so.
So is your understanding that the current 1/3 portion that you have access to now will be permanent?
It will be permanent. Once I saw that the foundation was being built there, and I said, "Hey guys, what's going on?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, actually you're not getting that back." So, yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That was my main question, but thank you for being here tonight.
Okay, all right, thank you.
You can have a seat. Oh, you took yourself, no, he took himself out. Yep. All right, now we will hear from Crystal Cordova. From Pan American Properties, you can approach the microphone. And when you're ready, you'll have up to 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening. Board, if you deem this as an appropriate request, we would like to remove rental deductions for fencing, landscaping, and yard care services. I ask that you please take the following reasons into consideration.
Yes, ma'am, it took us all just a second to calculate. So we are not allowed to entertain requests from you. You would have needed to file an appeal to the reductions that she was given. So the management company would need to file an appeal of their own. Many times we've had cases where we've had both the tenant appealing that it wasn't enough and the landlord's appealing that it was too much.
Right.
So it's not appropriate at this time to hear that as part of your comments, but if you have anything else you'd like to add in defense of the appeal, you may.
Sure, okay. So it'll be on the same issues. So on page 2 of the staff report, regarding, well, actually page 3 of the staff report regarding the fencing. The fencing issue has been addressed on more than one occasion. So it has been reinforced with bolts.
I'm going to stop you one more time. You're fine. But so asking for a reinstatement of reductions because you fixed it is something you take up with the agency separately, not here tonight.
Oh, okay.
Because it's the findings of fact are in evidence, so we can't accept testimony from you that something's different than what's in evidence, unless I'm saying that wrong.
That's right. The decision itself on page 25 of the hearing officer's decision explains what to do, what the property owner should do if they have repaired the conditions for which the decreases were granted, and that would be to submit a request for compliance. So you can submit that to our office for anything that has been completed.
So for the reductions that the agency has awarded the tenant, tonight she's asking for us to reconsider what was given to her, and your comments would just be anything that would enhance your defense of the decision that was already rendered. And anything else is not really appropriate at this point, but we will discuss the appeal that's before us.
So just to clarify, and just because I'm confused myself.
Sure.
I think, is it correct to say that it would not be appropriate to discuss that any remedies to these issues, because that would be something that would either be taken up with the agency or on their own appeal, but this is more so in response to the appellant's request to increase. So your comments should be focused on the evidence that was submitted and discussed during the hearing that the determination was made based upon.
Right.
So if you want to dispute or comment on that set of evidence that was introduced before the decision was made,
Right.
That's what's relevant here tonight.
And the same thing we told the tenant, nothing that's happened since or information or things you've done since then, that's not relevant. We're discussing the case that is closed.
Oh, right. These are not any happenings since after. This is only discussing, I only came here to discuss what's in the staff report.
Okay.
Regarding the fencing, for fencing, $30, well, actually, I'm gonna go back to the previous page and discuss the backyard. So the backyard was granted at 125 out of max 175.
Can you remind us what page you're looking on?
Sure. Page 2. Page 2, section B, paragraph 2.
Oh, the staff report, okay. Go ahead.
So for the backyard, I'm in agreement with what was granted of 125 out of 175 maximum deduction. because the backyard was reduced and not eliminated. On page 3, the next page, regarding fencing, $30 was granted for fencing. And this was not afterwards, but while this was happening, the fence was reinforced on 2 separate occasions. I am the property manager, and this was back in March, and I brought proof of emails that were sent at that time, discussion.
That's the sort of thing we can't
We
can't entertain, but thank you for understanding.
No worries. Thank you. And regarding landscaping, landscaping was granted $15 out of $90. And the reason the appellant, Ms. Pasker, said is because she was receiving landscaping services to her backyard upon moving in with prior ownership. And she was notified when we did take over ownership 1 month after her moving in that she would no longer receive services in her backyard, which we are not legally required to provide, only in common areas, which we have continued to provide in the front yard. So the succulents that were mentioned in the staff report by the appellant were considered more of a gift. And she has mentioned being inconvenienced that those plants have died, but they only require about once a month watering, and she did have the option of maintaining them if she liked them, but she would have preferred for those to be replaced, and that is the reason why she has asked for a rental deduction. Regarding the yard care services, kind of the same deal. We don't provide care to the backyard, and it doesn't really make sense to consider to offer rental deductions for that reason. And another thing, the final thing I would like to mention, to consider, because a lot of these are based on inconveniences, and because of that, ownership has granted Ms. Pasker a $250 rental deduction prior to this hearing, prior to the hearing on the appeal, and she was granted $250 per month deduction beginning September 2022 all the way to July 2023. So she has been compensated prior to the hearing, and once we did get that, she was also retro paid for that as
All right. Do we have questions for this speaker? I do. So the 3 tenants you have after you bought the building, they all moved in either right before you bought it or right after? Within the last 2 years?
only Ms. Pasker was there before ownership changed. The following 2 residents moved in after Pan American had already taken over as management company.
Okay. And was it your company or the prior owner who applied for the permit to build the ADUs? I mean, did you guys do that or did the prior owner do that?
I believe it was our current owner. I'm with the management company, so
Okay.
I'm not
You might not know that.
100% sure, but I believe that it's current ownership that wanted to build the ADUs.
And are you aware that it's common practice in landlord-tenant relations and contracts that it's my understanding that when you inherit a tenant from a property you purchase, that it's the terms of their lease that are to be honored in regards to things like services and lawn care, and that if you choose not to continue them, they are able to seek remedy to sue effectively to reduce the amount they contracted for. Are you aware?
Yes.
Okay. All right, I have no more questions for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to move into discussion. Does Does anyone have anything they want to opine on? Commissioner Gwynn?
Yeah. I was just, if staff, and I should ask this of staff before, and maybe Tracy, Haka, if you can, but Tracy could, I choose, there was some portion of the $125 for the outdoor backyard was for the complete loss of the yard for a certain period of time. And of course, this is an unusual situation that I don't know this has come from the board, because it entails that, but it also entails deadlines for filing in that. And could Tracy or Haka explain exactly in this case how it was determined the period of time that was covered by this petition for the entire loss of the property?
Yes, I can address that, Commissioner. This is because this is a regular decrease petition as opposed to a construction decrease petition. Under Regulation 4203 of the board's regulations, you can go retroactively to the date of the petition. This is a regulation that you all had passed several years ago. But what you do is you look at the situation at the time of the hearing. So because that's when the hearing officer is granting the decrease based on the conditions at the time of the hearing. Based on the conditions at the time of the hearing, determined by the hearing officer, was a reduction to a third of its original size. That decrease that they granted was 125, and they made it retroactive to the first rent due after the date of the petition.
Haka, can you restate that last sentence? We lost you there for a second.
Oh, I apologize. So then they took that decrease that they granted at 125, and they went back, granted it backward all the way to the date, the first rent date due after the filing of the petition, which is what Regulation 4203 requires.
So, and I get that because in the decision itself, it shows that there was those 6 months were taken out of the August rent. But my question is more, I guess, was the consideration of the $125 for the yard, part of that, according to the decision, was affected by the loss of the backyard in its entirety for a certain period of time? That's
not correct. Sorry, Commissioner. Go ahead.
Haka?
Yes, I'm sorry. I just wanted to make sure that Commissioner Gwynn, the $125 is a reflection of the decrease at the time of the hearing. So it's based on not the loss of complete loss, but because at the time of the hearing, the backyard had been reduced to a third of its size. That's what it's based on. It's not based on the complete loss. Had at the time of the hearing, there still had been a complete loss of the backyard, then that decrease, whatever amount it would have been at that time, would have been made retroactive all the way. But this retroactivity applies to the condition at the time of the hearing.
Right, and it's because it was not under a construction-related decrease petition, we would be able to consider, Tracy Matty Dubb, would you concur with, would you take a stab at explaining that? Our hearings department manager.
Granted, I don't have the regulation numbers in front of
That's
me,
okay.
but, okay, under a regular decrease, the decrease, if one is granted, is retroactive to the first rent date after the petition was filed. So that's why we have the retroactive calculations. Also, a decrease can only be granted if it warrants one at the time of the hearing. So if somebody comes and says, yeah, my sink doesn't work correctly, and the sink doesn't work correctly for the entire period after they filed their petition, but the day before the hearing, the landlord fixes the sink, comes to the hearing and says the sink is fixed, here's the proof. And the hearing officer finds that in fact it is repaired, the decrease is 0. And that's what the regulations call for. Now, a construction decrease, on the other hand, so that's what Hako is trying to explain here, is that the decrease of 125 is based on what the condition was at the time of the hearing. So they had remedied to some extent her ability to use part of the yard according to the findings. Now, on a construction decrease is a little bit different because it relates back to the start of construction.
Impact.
And so it can take into account these fluctuating things that are happening because that's the nature of construction, right? Some days you will have extreme noise, or some days you will, because there's different phases of construction and different things going on. And
I think you've
yeah,
made it
and
very,
then at the end of the story though is that with construction, you must file your petition before construction is concluded in order to relate back to any of it.
okay.
So I just have a question to make sure I understand both your comment and Haka's in relation to what's in the staff report. I think what I took it to mean in the staff report, it specifically in regards to the appellant's request for a deduction for the period that the backyard was lost entirely. The staff report acknowledges that the hearing officer acknowledged that time period and the fact that the backyard was entirely lost during a period of time. And it also states that the hearing officer took into account the period of time that the backyard was eliminated in calculating the rent decrease. So it seems to me based upon the comments tonight that I'm misreading this, but I'm just trying to understand how to make those two, what's in the report and what was said tonight, compatible.
And maybe the author of the report, Mr. Mordesai, can opine on that.
Yes, exactly. I would say that would be me. Commissioner, I'm not sure if my explanation that I just gave right now, if it was unclear.
No, he's asking about under letter C in the typed staff report, it makes reference to sort of compromising on the fact that taking into account when figuring the $125 figure. And we've been made to understand that it's the condition at the time, which cannot take into account.
Understood. Then let me apologize for the lack of clarity in how it was phrased in the staff report. Essentially, we go back all the way to the beginning of the petition. And so that time period that the yard was entirely inaccessible is considered in going all the way back to that period because the conditions existed then. But the amount of the decrease that you can go all the way back to, the amount itself is based on what is occurring at the time of the hearing.
So you're saying your choice of words
So it
could have been different.
Yes, obviously it wasn't clear, so yes.
So was that so basically the information was considered, but it's not relevant essentially because of the time period. Is that correct?
That is correct, but it is an administrative finding, and if there's other cases where these issues would come up, this is an administrative finding.
Ms. Maydob, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify one point is that the discussion of the use of the backyard for that period of time is described in, the description of the testimony and the discussion period of the decision. When you get to the findings and you're at finding number 31 that describes, the decrease amount and the justification for it, that particular reason is absent from that paragraph for the very reason that I explained. So while the hearing officer listened to everybody's testimony and certainly included that in the record because it was presented and it was relevant. It is not a finding on which she could base her decision for the regulation reasons.
That makes sense. So in number 24, it's acknowledged as a fact, but in 31, it's not actually a part of the determination to get to the 125 deduction.
Exactly.
Got it.
That's correct.
Thank you both. And before we go around again, I'm going to ask a question of Miss Maddie Dowd, but while I've still got you, don't turn that mic off yet. I'm concerned, and maybe you can reflect this in the differences between the two petition processes for us. I'm concerned that the means and methods plan does not seem to be crystal clear as to the footprint of a brand new construction project or a demolition project or the subsequent structure that's going to go on it. So why is that not addressed more in this case? Is it because it was a rent decrease petition and not a construction related decrease petition? Would you just rip that? Oh, it's your arm. Can you explain the difference?
I don't believe I can. I can only tell you that what my understanding of a means and methods plan is, and I don't know what was presented in this case to the extent that it was. My understanding of a means and methods plan is part of the permitting process. Oftentimes, it's required to be filing at the application end of things, and so what ends up being part of the final permit process may or may not look similar to the means and methods plan because permitting may require changes and things like that.
This is not a quiz, by the way.
Right.
This is not a test.
It's just complicated because, it might require somebody to get somebody from permitting over into the hearing to explain things. But the important thing is that my understanding is that the means and methods plan is certainly a roadmap. They're certainly signed under penalty of perjury, that they're true and correct to their knowledge. So, applicants should not be lying on that about the impacts on tenants. I think this board has seen the consequences of that come to bear on some cases, but always keeping in mind that the petitioner is the one who bears that burden of proof.
Thank you. And I would like for Tracy or Haka or Mr. Mordecai to also answer that question because I'm having, when I was researching this case and I spoke with staff earlier about the legal issues in this case, it's not that I'm not satisfied that staff did a good job on the hearing. It's not that. It's actually that it just brings up other issues that impacts could be felt upon the basket of goods for which the tenant has contracted, which is the subject of the rent decrease petition process, that were not mitigated or addressed or foreseen by either the property owner with whom the ultimate responsibility does lie, or the management company whose job is to carry out communications with the tenants. So how does the city and the tenant and the owner, how do they have this big of a miss on notifying the tenants that they're going to be losing 2/3 of their yard to a footprint of a construction project? And how should that have been addressed?
This petition.
If I may, go ahead, Tracy, please.
This petition is addressing the loss of amenities or housing services. A construction petition deals with the impacts of the construction on the tenants, the unmitigated impacts of construction. So although the means and methods plan may have been mentioned and may have been, I don't know if it was submitted as evidence, it will be the construction decrease petition that will address the impacts. And I don't know, the permit application that is submitted to the city should be very clear on where that development is going to occur. And I don't believe we have any facts about that at this time because that was not the subject of this petition.
Okay. I see, as we continue to talk to the city about processes, I see intersectionality here on for instance, what footprint of an ADU is permitted and drawn on a piece of paper somewhere at the city, and what the tenant is going to be losing as part of and then is addressed as part of our process, should be talking to each other. So I'm sure as a government, we will continue to address those things in the future. But sorry, that's a long-winded way of saying, but I think it was a discussion worth having. I, for one, as one commissioner, I cannot find clear error in our hearing officer's decision. The ranges are things that at the last meeting, we've already discussed as a board that we want staff to bring back post haste. And we will continue to discuss those things. So on this matter,
I do have one more comment.
Commissioner
if that's okay.
Gonska.
Thank you. I want to go back quickly to the comments we heard from both parties regarding the landscaping. And it is in the record here from the hearing that the tenant is not responsible for the upkeep of the landscaping. So I think it's well established here that that was part of the services that the tenant was contracted for and was included, as is everything else that the tenant receives in the rent price. So that to me is very clear from this. I want to the point that you just made, I think that this is something that we've come across numerous times. And as a matter of fact, we'll be looking at the next agenda item, discussing in the next agenda item. But regardless of my personal opinion or others' opinion, we're not able to provide a decrease that takes into account the replacement value or the actual cost of a replacement gardener, for example, per our authority and per the regulations. We are only able to, and the hearing officer is only able to look at what portion of that lost service, how much of your overall rent that portion relates to. It's a clumsy way of saying it, but I think we're not able to look at what it actually costs for you to get that service back, but more so what portion of your overall rent does that constitute. And that's a personal frustration of mine, but it is very clearly what our authority and what the regulations state. So just want to clarify that.
Thank you. Commissioner Ivanov.
So we had an appeal several months ago, I think, that dealt with a very similar issue where we were dealing with a decreased petition, and we were sitting here evaluating the reasonableness of whether we thought the amount was reasonable or not. We had this whole debate. The only issue that stuck out to me reading this before we even got here today was the fencing issue. And the reason that I say that is because although the $30 would be considered reasonable because it's in line with the board regulations, it is the lowest possible amount. It's from the 30 to 260, 30 is the lowest possible. And from some of the context that we heard, at least when I read the report, it just, it seemed like the fence was wobbly, there's some nails sticking out. But when you take into account the context that the fence is completely falling over, the nails are protruding, they're not just protruding, they're rusty. People are climbing over the fence and potentially getting into the property. When we had this kind of debate on that appeal months ago, we ended up deciding that the best course of action was potentially to remand it back. Are we potentially interested in remanding just on the fencing issue?
I'm not, and I'll tell you why. For one, before we move on to Vice Chair Leslie, just to answer your question and discussion. If we go by what Ms. Maddie Daub just reminded us of, it's the condition at the time. And our inspector noted in the record shows that Ms. Pasker's fence is not broken and makes a reference to hearing officer's decision, page 10, in which at the time of the hearing, it had been shored up, and there was some commentary in here that attempts had been made by the management and the construction company to do a better job. But again, it's the wrong kind of petition to discuss construction related that changes from week to week and moment to moment as the construction company moves stuff around. That's why a different type of petition, in my opinion, would have been appropriate to take up the type of point that you mentioned. Vice Chair Leslie.
So, as you stated, a construction petition would have been better suited for this case here. Would that also address safety?
So I'll let staff answer, but means and methods and the city of Santa Monica are supposed to look out for tenants in occupied buildings through their methods of the building and safety division and means, and
Not-
but it does not fall under our purview.
No. I'm not talking about in that aspect. I'm talking in the aspect of just no other way for me to say it tactfully, but to say common sense. If you have someone that's a single woman in a unit and she feels unsafe because her gate is wobbly, because our unhoused neighbors are jumping the fence, and we don't know what could take place because that's endangerment of her safety. That's where I'm coming from.
So yes, a construction decrease petition, one of the factors that can be taken into consideration is the construction being done in a safe manner? Is the safety of the tenant being impacted by the method and that the construction is being conducted under? And I heard Ms. Pasker say that, she thinks she will file a decrease or a construction-related decrease as long as the construction is still going on. As Ms. Maddie Daub pointed out, a construction decrease can only be filed while the construction is underway. But yes, safety is one of the factors that can be considered in that petition.
Thank you.
Very good. All right. Well, seeing no more requests for discussion, I would love to entertain a motion on this item. Well, none of y'all like to make motions. Vice Chair Leslie.
Just turn my mic on. I make the motion that we conclude this as finder of fact. Affirm this action here.
All right. Is there a second? All right. We've had a motion to affirm the hearing officer's decision and finding of facts and conclusions of law, and a second. Will you call the roll, please?
Yes, Commissioner Gonska,
Yes.
Commissioner Gwynn,
Yes.
Commissioner Ivanov,
Yes.
Vice Chair Leslie,
Yes.
Chair Foster.
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right. That was a great discussion. Let's move on to our last item of the night, 14A, a board discussion item. A request of Commissioners Gonska and Gwynn to discuss the rent decrease standards and to establish a subcommittee to review the issue. Which of you would like to present? Commissioner Gonska?
Thank you. This, as I mentioned earlier tonight, and as we've talked about a lot in previous meetings, there's very often in appeals, there's conversation around looking at the ranges that are in our regulations for decreases that are awarded. And so looking through the regulations, and for those who are interested, this is Regulation 4200 that lays out the standards, these ranges. The regulations also state that that these ranges and these regulations shall be subject to periodic review by the board. And that's it. There isn't any specific time frame that's given. There isn't any instruction on how to look at it, what to look for. So in looking back at the historical record, we've seen that the last time these ranges were adjusted was in 2016. Previous to that, the last time I believe was 2002. So as we can see just from most recent history, there isn't any regular review of this process. So given the fact that it's been 6 or 7 years since the last time, I think that it's appropriate to take another look at this. If it were just that, I would be open to making a motion and potentially changing that in a meeting or two. But as we've started to look through this and think through it, there are a number of other issues that have come up that we think would be best suited for a subcommittee to do additional research and look at historical record, talk to staff to get their input as well. And just to give one example, the last time these ranges were adjusted, they were done so based upon the change from 2002 to 2016 of the median rent price in the city. Another way you could look at it is looking at CPI, inflation. There are different ways to make adjustments if we feel that adjustments are necessary. So because of that and other issues that we'd like to look into, we think that a subcommittee would be the most appropriate way to do so. So I'm happy to take any questions, but I know Commissioner Gwynn also had some comments.
That's great. Okay, Commissioner Gwynn?
Yeah, I'll just add in, like he said, Kurt said that we've come up with some other things besides just the ranges that we might want to consider. That's why we made this a little broader in its description. I can think of just, and this.
What are those other
I was gonna say a
things?
couple of them as
Okay,
an
great.
idea are, we recently had discussion about storage and garages. Whether we want to completely separate storage when a garage is considered in the decrease process. In the last one we had, they were combined together. And maybe it would be a way to, certain storage would be considered separately from the garage. Another would be possibly the actual ranges themselves. We can think of an elevator. It seems like the upper range is very low in the loss of an elevator. And so we'd like to research how they came up when these originally were made to find out what their thought processes were. Now, how much of that is available? We've looked up the staff reports. We haven't looked at them yet, but because that's up to the subcommittee, but that's a couple of the items that we thought could be looked into, and maybe you guys have some ideas as well, and as to what also you want the subcommittee, or we want the subcommittee to come back with, whether we come back with staff's, what the subcommittee tells staff to do and come back with an administrative item with what we recommend, or whether you want us to come back as a report of a subcommittee and tell you what we think and then go to the administrative item.
And one other point, I definitely alluded to this, but I don't remember if I made it perfectly clear that one thing I think we would look at is if we should change the regulations to make the review of the ranges or anything else relevant to 4200, to make it an automatic review process over a designated period of time, as opposed to it being required for a commissioner to, or staff to.
Or an automated adjustment, whichever
Correct.
the case may be.
Yep.
These are excellent. This is a fantastic item. It has come up organically out of some of our other cases and other discussions. And it's not the first time, and it won't be the last. As the only remaining board member who was present for the brainstorm and why we examined it the last time was directly as a result of a case like we heard tonight, where we just thought, oh, well, we haven't heard a case with this exact category of this exact thing, and that seems really low. That doesn't seem, so I applaud you bringing this item. And for myself, I think it definitely deserves a subcommittee's type of attention to it, because we don't want to limit ourselves necessarily as a board to what we can come up with in the moment on the dais as far as direction. It should probably be something that is more considered. We don't want to delay, but we also don't want to rush and limit the scope. So I would be all in favor of a subcommittee to study the issues, and I would be happy to defer to other board members and take myself out of the running unless somebody feels differently. Any other comments on, should we form the subcommittee now? All right, are there any nominations for this subcommittee? Or volunteers?
Just a point of clarification, what's the structure of it? Is it just two members, or is there like?
2 members, it is a Brown Act.
Two members.
Yeah, it's a Brown Act situation, so it's 2 members maximum. And they would have, much like Vice Chair Leslie and I are the subcommittee for the saddest search in the world. Whoever is on this committee would set regular meetings, which would not be public because it's not subject to the Brown Act.
Like I would as well.
Hearing no other nominations, all those in favor of Commissioner Gwynn and Commissioner Gonska forming the subcommittees, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. None opposed. All right. Well, we hope you will develop a schedule and a timeline for what you hope to be your return with this item. You do not necessarily have to wait to come back to us publicly. If you and staff feel in the interim between now and next meeting that you have sufficient material, then staff can notify the rest of us via the agenda.
Sounds good.
All right,
Thank you.
fantastic. All right, item 16, adjournment.
Just announce the date of the next meeting.
Oh, yes. The next regular meeting of the Rent Control Board will be right here on the second Thursday of the month. That's October 12th, 2023 at 7 p.m. here in City Hall chambers. And
Vice Chair Leslie has something?
did you have something to say, Vice Chair? Oh, I see your name in there now. I wasn't this is so far out of my,
I know. I
Yes,
move
ma'am.
that we adjourn the meeting.
I'm going to second that. All those in favor of adjournment, say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.